To say there's a lot to ask the FBI director is an understatement. And one of the members of the Judiciary Committee who actually did his job in asking about a lot of these issues is Congressman Mike Johnson, who represents Louisiana's 4th Congressional District. And I just want to show you a couple of excerpts because we have the congressman with us tonight to speak with him about the events of today, the concerns about the FBI, as well as other issues. So one of the topics on which Congressman Johnson focused, and it's not surprising given his background as a former constitutional lawyer, was this court ruling that we reported on extensively. We walked you through the rationale of that ruling, the order that it resulted in, which is really unprecedented. The court essentially said that the findings of the court demonstrate one of the gravest attacks on the First Amendment in many years, if not decades, a systemic effort on the part of the Biden administration to control the flow of information and the expression of viewpoints by American citizens on the internet about our core political controversies. So here is Congressman Johnson asking the FBI director about that court ruling and the related controversies surrounding it earlier today.
We had this explosive 155-page opinion from a federal court in my home state of Louisiana. It explains in detail that the FBI has been directly involved in what the court says is, quote, arguably the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. The court ordered the White House, DOJ, and FBI, among others, to immediately cease colluding with and coercing social media companies to suppress American speech, of course, conservative speech in particular. Director Wray, I find it stunning. You made no mention of this court opinion either in your opening statement today or in this lengthy 14-page report that you prepared on July 12th, which is 8 days after the court ruling. Have you read the ruling, sir?
I am familiar with the ruling, and I've reviewed it with our Office of General Counsel.
Are you deeply disturbed by what they've told you about the ruling if you haven't read it yourself?
Obviously, we're going to comply with the court's order, the court's preliminary injunction. We sent out guidance to the field and the headquarters about how to do that. Needless to say, the injunction itself is a subject of ongoing litigation, and so I'll decline to comment further on.
Well, let me tell you what the court concluded, because it should be the first thing you think about every morning and the last thing you think about at night. They said that, quote, the court found, apparently the FBI engaged in a massive effort to suppress disfavored conservative speech and blatantly ignored the First Amendment's right to free speech. The evidence shows the FBI threatened adverse consequences to social media companies that they did not comply with its censorship request. The court found that, quote, this seemingly unrelenting pressure by the FBI and the other defendants had the intended result of suppressing millions of protected free speech postings by American citizens. As a result, the court states, for example, millions of citizens did not hear about the Hunter Biden laptop story prior to the November 3rd, 2020 election. Page 4 of the court ruling lists some of the important subjects that the Biden administration and the FBI forced the social media platforms to suppress. The evidence shows your agency, the people that directly report to you, suppressed conservative-leaning free speech about topics like the laptop, the lab leak theory of COVID-19's origin, the effectiveness of masks and COVID-19 lockdowns and vaccines, speech about election integrity in the 2020 presidential election, security of voting by mail, even parody about the president himself, negative posts about the economy. The FBI made the social media platforms pull that information off the internet if it came from conservative sources.
So that alone is remarkable. Just the court ruling itself, whether you agree with it or not, is an extraordinary indictment of how the FBI is using its power. And I defy you to go find your favorite left liberal YouTube programs or political podcast and see if there's any substantive discussion of that court ruling at all. To the extent that large media corporations talked about it, it was to malign it, to mock it, to insist that because it was a Trump-appointed judge, even though it was a judge that, like all federal judges, had the approval of the Senate, it was somehow inherently illegitimate. The Biden administration, of course, is appealing that, but just that issue alone merits enormous amounts of scrutiny and journalistic attention, and it received very little. And the same was true of most of the issues presented at this hearing today, which we will analyze and review and report on as soon as we are done with our discussion with Congressman Johnson, which we are about to conduct right now. Congressman Johnson has represented Louisiana's 4th Congressional District since 2016. He is a member of House leadership, currently the vice chair of the House Republican Conference, and prior to being elected to Congress, spent most of his life as a constitutional lawyer, engaging in litigation and other forms of activism to secure the Bill of Rights. We are delighted to welcome the congressman to his debut appearance on System Update to discuss today's hearing and related issues involving the FBI. Congressman, good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Hey, Glenn, glad to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just dive right into this hearing today, which I found very compelling. I watched it from start to finish, and I was thinking the whole time that I wished as many Americans as possible could. Before we get into some of the specific issues and the exchanges that you and your colleagues had, just please tell me your general impression about the hearing and about the posture of Director Wray and how he was providing or not providing a lot of the information that was requested.
I'll tell you, Glenn, we're very frustrated. He was evasive. He seemed either unprepared or unwilling to answer some very important, very legitimate, long overdue questions. And I feel like that's what people came away with. I'm talking to constituents this afternoon who watched it. Many of them watched it from start to finish as you did. And they're just so discouraged. They're so frustrated because they feel like we can't get any accountability from this Department of Justice and its leadership. And it's of great concern to all of us.
One of the dynamics that really struck me, and I think it's one of the reasons he felt entitled to behave in the way he did, this kind of evasive and non-responsive way, was there was a very schizophrenic feel to the hearing because the Republican members on the committee had 5 minutes to ask questions, and then there was alternating that with your Democratic colleagues. And with a couple of exceptions, including Congresswoman Jayapal, whose questioning I thought was necessary and impressive, and we're going to cover that in just a little bit. Most Democrats were there essentially just to heap praise on the FBI. And this is something I wanted to ask you about. The kind of my own history is growing up and kind of coming of age in the 80s and 90s, where criticism of and skepticism of the FBI, the CIA, the NSA was a staple of left liberal politics, of Democratic Party politics for decades coming out of the Cold War. There's also been a kind of right-wing strain that's been concerned about that as well. If you look at polling data now, overwhelmingly, people who identify as Democrats no longer have skepticism of these agencies. They regard them with almost a kind of reverence. And there was anger that you were even daring to question the FBI. Is this something, as a member of Congress since 2016, you've been noticing? And what do you make of that? How do you explain what seems to be a pretty radical change?
It is a radical change. I have the same memories of the 80s and 90s as well. But I think this radical change is easily explained. See, certainly the elected Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee understand full well that the FBI has been co-opted by the executive branch. They've been co-opted by the Biden administration. This began in the Obama administration. I think the seeds of this were sown, and then it's taken to its full fruition right now. And so it's effectively a political arm in so many ways of the White House. The DOJ that is supposed to be administering and enforcing the law blindly, where everyone has equal justice under the law, that used to be the way this worked. It doesn't work that way anymore. Under Merrick Garland as the Attorney General, under Director Wray on his watch, we've seen the Biden administration use the DOJ to do its bidding. And so they're censoring and silencing not all Americans, conservative viewpoints, specific Americans. They're raiding the homes of political opponents. They're labeling concerned parents at school board meetings as terrorists. Everybody knows the laundry list. It's piled up so high now. And there's no other conclusion you can draw but that it's a political operative operation now.
If you go back and look at the real-time writings in the late 1940s, when this national security state was created in the wake of World War II with the National Security Act 1947 and the like, people are very aware that they were doing something rather radical. They were creating a part of the government that was going to operate with great secrecy. Obviously, the FBI predates that, but the rest of the U.S. security state was created, especially the CIA, during that time. And I think a lot of the powers and postures of those other agencies began to kind of contaminate and infiltrate the FBI. But even if you talk to the people who work in these agencies, they will tell you that what was always inculcated first and foremost in their brains is that you do not use these powers against the American people. The FBI, of course, is a domestic law enforcement agency, but even there, the idea was always the worst possible thing the FBI could do was to use those powers for political ends. You have a lot of these kind of whistleblowers, obviously the one I work with, Edward Snowden at the NSA, others from the NSA who say the reason they're coming forward is because that has been abandoned, that these agencies are now more political actors than they are anything else. What do you make of that critique?
I think that's exactly right. And that is what keeps us up at night, Glenn. We're worried about what has become of these agencies that have such broad and expansive powers. The top law enforcement agency in the country that is supposed to be protecting and serving the American people is being used against them. It's violating the privacy of Americans. It is trampling upon their fundamental constitutional rights. And it goes without check because, what so many people are frustrated about is, they asked me today, why can't you guys get accountability? Why can't you bring some order to this? Well, the political reality is here that people sometimes forget is that we only have the majority in one house of Congress right now, and it's a bare majority at that. We don't have in Congress the ability to, indict someone for violating the law or to put them on trial in a court. All we can do is put them on trial in the court of public opinion. That's what the hearings are, and then bring legislative reforms to do our best to ensure that these abuses cannot happen again in the future. Ultimately, too, and this is important, we have the power of the purse. And so the FBI, for example, wants this multi-billion-dollar new headquarters. I don't think they deserve that if they can't even show us that they can respect the constitutional rights of the people they're supposed to be serving. It's gotten out of control, and I think the evidence shows that.
I was really struck by what seemed to be the contempt that Director Wray had for those of you on the committee who wanted to ask him questions. He's obviously a very smart person, and yet the ignorance he was feigning about so many issues was so striking. And of course, if he's expressing contempt for you, it means he's expressing contempt for your constituents and ultimately for the constitutional order. I wanted to ask about one specific issue on which you focused, and I was glad you did, which was this extraordinary courtroom that came out of from a judge in your state, in Louisiana. The magnitude of this ruling seems so enormous to me, especially when set next to the virtual lack of media attention it has been given, not just because of the order itself, but because of the findings. Why did you decide that judicial ruling was so significant that you wanted to spend a good part of the 5 minutes you had with the director today?
Look, I encourage my colleagues to use their 5 minutes on it as well. I think this ought to be the headline in every newspaper and every news organization in the country. I mean, this judge wrote 155 pages to issue a preliminary injunction. That's rare. I used to be a federal court litigator. I litigated constitutional law cases. This is not done often, and the reason Judge Doty did that is because he wanted to methodically lay out here exactly what the evidence has showed in his courtroom, and the evidence and what it has shown is stunning. And he uses words that sound like it's political talking points from us. This is a federal judge who says that arguably this is the most massive attack on the First Amendment freedom and the right to free speech in United States history. And he is not overstating it. The implications of this are gigantic. The court lays out the facts, how the FBI was regularly meeting with the social media platforms and basically coercing them under threat of negative consequence to take down voices they disagreed with. And it wasn't, foreign malign actors, as Director Wray feigned there. He knows what was going on. This was American citizens. It was conservatives online talking about their concerns over election security, over vaccine mandates, and the effectiveness of the vaccine itself, and even parody about the president, jokes about President Biden, negative content about the economy. The FBI had agents meeting with the social media platforms and basically ordering them to take this stuff down. Now, this is in the record of the case. They sent Agent Chan to go and testify, Elvis Chan, who's now an infamous figure, because he was in charge of this. He works in the San Francisco district office of the FBI, the field office, because that's the head where all the social media companies are headquartered. And he was meeting with him regularly and having this great success because he testified under oath in the litigation that he had a 50% success rate. Glenn, when he brought a concern and said, these conservative voices need to be silenced, censored, taken offline, it was done at their behest. Of course, if you're the social media platforms, this is the FBI, you're not going to mess with them. So they did their bidding. And the effect of it is profound. I mean, the court pointed out, just by way of example, he said millions of free speech postings of American citizens were never seen because the FBI had them taken down. And one effect was that, for example, the court notes millions of Americans never heard about the Hunter Biden laptop story prior to the November 2020 election. We know now post-election polling says that had they known of that, it might well have affected many, many votes. And we'll never know. We can never unwind history to know what an effect that had. That's just one example of so many.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.